Okay, again, this is Heather Cooley, and I'm here with my colleague Matthew Heberger. Today we're going to talk about a new model that we have developed called the Cost Effectiveness of Water Conservation and Efficiency. We call it, for short, the Pacific Institute CE2 Model. Just a little bit of background information about the Pacific Institute. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization, and we're based in Oakland, California. We conduct interdisciplinary research to produce solutions that advance environmental protection, economic development, and social equity in California, nationally, and internationally. And I just want to invite you to join us in celebrating our 25th anniversary this year. And you can find more information about that and about our work at our website. And the web link for that is www.pacinst.org. So today what I want to do is just cover a couple of basic things. I want to provide you with a background on a cost effectiveness analysis. I'm then going to introduce the Pacific Institute CE2 model, and then we're going to provide a short demonstration of the model, and then we'll have a question and answer period. If you do have questions throughout, you can go ahead and type them into the chat box, and we'll try to get to those as we're going along. But we will have quite a bit of time for Q&A at the end too, and so if we don't get to them, we can come back to that. When we do the Q&A session, what we'll do is have you either raise your hand if you would like, and we can unmute you so you can talk, or we can just go ahead. You can go ahead and type in your question into the chat box, and we'll answer it for everybody. So to get started, I want to just provide a brief introduction on a cost-effective analysis and what exactly that is. Quite simply, a cost-effectiveness analysis is a technique to compare the costs associated with investments with the benefits that they will return. It can be conducted from different perspectives, for example, from a customer perspective, a utility perspective, and society perspective. The customer perspective really looks at the costs and benefits, in this case of a conservation measure, to the customer. So that could include, say, wastewater savings to the customer or energy savings. If a cost-effectiveness analysis is conducted from the utility perspective, that specifically looks at, again, the costs and benefits to the utility. And the society perspective looks quite broadly and looks at the costs and benefits to society, so it can include perhaps some of the environmental benefits of a conservation program or some of the avoided costs of the electricity provider, so it's a much broader. We'll go into more detail in terms of the perspectives in the model that we've developed, but just to give you a preview, the model allows you to look at cost effectiveness from the customer perspective, from the utility perspective, but also from a combined perspective, which is a combination of the customer and utility perspective. And we'll get into more detail in that in a couple of slides. So why do a cost effectiveness analysis? At the fundamental level, it's really to determine if it makes financial sense to invest in a conservation program. In the simplest forms, if the benefits exceed the cost, then that's an indication of wanting to invest. If the benefits do not exceed the cost, then it suggests that you do not want to invest in that program. A cost-effectiveness analysis, however, can also be used to rank competing alternatives. For example, it can be used to rank various conservation measures to determine which is a better investment. It can also be used to compare water conservation and efficiency measures with other water supply options. So the CE2 model, this is a model that we've developed here at the Pacific Institute. It's available for free, and we'll provide links to that where you're able to download the model. The model was funded by the Department of Water Resources through a Prop 50 grant program. And really the CE2 model is not intended to provide you with an answer. Rather, it provides you with a suite of standard financial metrics that can be used by planners and managers to determine if it makes economic sense to invest in a conservation program. It allows you to compare proposed or existing conservation measures and to rank alternatives. It also lets you assess the financial desirability of conservation measures from multiple viewpoints, and as I mentioned, it provides you with perspectives of the agency, the customer, and then a combined customer and agency perspective. It also provides a standardized method and calculation to share and compare data and results with other individuals at your utility, with other utilities. By standardizing it, it really allows for sort of communication in ways that are comparable. So let me turn it now over to my colleague Matthew Heberger, and he was the developer of the model.
Okay, thanks Heather, and good morning everyone. This is Matt, and I was the developer, programmer for the spreadsheet, and so I'm just going to walk you through kind of how it works and how to get started. And if anyone has any questions, as I go, feel free to, click the little raise your hand button in the webinar software. But otherwise, I'll just get right to it. So let's see here. Okay, so first off, apologies to any of you who are Mac users or Linux users. At the present time, it only works on Windows, and you do need a working copy of Microsoft Office, so that's Excel and Access, and anything from, they call it XP, which is the 2003 version on up, should work just fine. And we'll see this in a second, but it does have some macros in the background, and so you've got to make sure that you have those enabled when you start up the spreadsheet. And we do have a user manual. It's a nice PDF. We can mail you a print copy if you like, or you can download the free PDF on our website. And we also tried to put some comments in the spreadsheet to give you some information, and if there's maybe an unfamiliar term, to define it. So here's the user manual. Like I said, it's on our website, or you can download a copy. So where do you get it? You can get it for free on our website if you go to packinst.org, and then from there click on the resources page, and then you should see a header for the CE2 model. And like I said, we'll also mail you a copy if you want to get in touch with us either by phone or by email. And also really want to make sure to acknowledge our sponsors and funders. This was funded by California taxpayers through Proposition 50, and it was a grant through the Department of Water Resources. So thanks to them. And we also had a handful of really great reviewers who looked at sort of alpha and beta versions and gave us some really good feedback all along. So thanks to the folks on this list. And with that, I'm going to cancel the presentation and launch the spreadsheet and just walk you through a little bit of a software demo here. So like I said, it's just a regular spreadsheet. So you can see the here's the file, and this is what you would download, or you could email this to someone. And this is all you need to get started is this file, the CE Model.xls. So let me open that. And as you can see, Microsoft Office has identified a potential security concern. If you disable the macros, you won't be able to do much. So click Enable. And that's the first step, and it'll take a minute to get started here. And okay, it looks like we're in business. You may also see a warning at the top saying active content has been blocked. I think because I've opened this spreadsheet before and said, no, it's okay, I trust this document, that I'm not seeing it. So you'll arrive on the start page here, and you'll see a bunch of different buttons to navigate around. You can also see one spreadsheet at a time, and that's because we're in what I'm calling user mode, which is enabled by default, and it's this sort of simple view that makes it easy to enter data and sort of hides some of the more advanced stuff like the formulas. If you want to look under the hood at any time and see behind the scenes what's going on, you can just click this button, developer mode, and you can see all of that. But that's probably for, the 99% of users are going to want to stay in user mode, and the real hackers might want to go in here. So to get started, just want to click Next, and this takes you to what we call the General Information page, and you can optionally enter some information, who you are, the name of your agency, all this stuff. But the most important thing to do first is you need to create a file where your data is going to get stored, and that's why you need to have access, because the model stores all the information in a Microsoft Access database. So the first thing to do is create a new file, and I can click, it'll give you a default username, CE2 user data, that's fine. I already had a file with that name. Do I want to overwrite? No. Maybe I'll call it CE2 user data new. And that should just take a minute. So once I've done that, I can enter my name, the name of my agency if I like, the name of this scenario that I'm working on, a description, and this turns out to be fairly important, these series of checkboxes down here. Your agency, what do you provide, what type of services? And this really affects, here's one of those comments, and I'll mouse over that so you can see what this does here. Your response to this question determines which of the benefits of conservation accrue to your agency in the cost-benefit analysis. So are savings from reduced water use going to accrue to your agency? Yes. Say we're also providing wastewater. And in the example, in the instance where your utility is also providing electricity or natural gas, which would come into play for heating water in customers' homes, then you would check these boxes as well. Otherwise, let's just go ahead and click Next. And this takes you to the conservation measures page. It's pretty generic when you start off. We haven't really preloaded it with a lot of information, so you have to do a lot of the hard work yourself. So let me start in on an example, which would be, let's call it high efficiency clothes washers. And this is turned on, just one of them. So right, you can enter up to 30 different conservation measures if you're feeling really ambitious. And there are 3 different input tabs: fixed costs, variable costs, and benefits. And let me go to the first one of these. So fixed cost represents any kind of upfront costs or costs that are independent of the number of units that you're offering. So, if I'm offering rebates or direct installs for 10 units or 500 units, it's going to be the same regardless. A variable cost would be how much is that rebate. So it's going to depend on how many units we're offering. And so you can mouse over the cell here to get a little bit of a description. So say just a sort of a one-time startup cost to kind of get things going might be $1,500, planning meetings or other sorts of things. Staff hours to administer the program. How many hours per week are we going to spend on this? So say this takes 20 hours per week, and our staff, we're paying them $50 per hour. And how many work weeks in a year? Standard, I think, is about 50, depending on how generous your vacation policies are. And then we've also got places for some other fixed costs. If you're hiring an outside consultant, how much is that going to cost? Publicity, so if you're hiring advertising agencies or doing any kind of marketing. So say I'm distributing some flyers or doing a radio ad or something like that, I can put $2,500 in here. Evaluation and follow-up, pretty important element. How much are we spending on that? And then outside funding sources. So this would include any sort of additional funding that if you're partnering with, for instance, a gas or electric company, saying, for instance, they want to pay for part of your water conservation program because it also conserves energy. So suppose I'm partnering with my local energy or gas utility, and they're giving me $5,000 toward this program. So once I've done that, I can click Save on this sheet, and then we go to the variable costs sheet. And this is going to be a bunch of questions that relate to the number of units that we're offering in any given year. So first of all, what type of program is it? And we've got 3 different choices. Is it a direct install where either your agency staff or you're hiring a contractor that's going to go into your customers' homes or business and install this clothes washer or different kinds of faucets or sprayers or whatever? Is it a giveaway? So faucet aerators, hose nozzles, different things like that you might just give away to your customers for free. or is it a rebate program? So the choice here actually turns out to be pretty important because it affects the way the calculations take place. So let's suppose that this is actually a rebate program. And duration of the program, how many years are you going to run this program? So let's say we plan to offer rebates every year for the next 5 years. And how many rebates are we going to give each year? Is it going to be the same every year, or is it, for example, going to ramp up over time where we offer 100 this year and 200 next year or something like that? So let's say it's the same every year, and we're planning on giving 200 of these rebates each year. And then, okay, how much of the rebate is the rebate going to be? Let's say we're offering a rebate of $200 to our customers who purchase and install these high-efficiency clothes washers. And is there some labor hour that's depending on the number of rebates? So, for instance, this is pretty obvious with a direct install. If it takes 4 hours to drive out to the customer's house and install the unit, you could put that here. But if there's time for sort of managing the administration or coupons or any sorts of things like that, you could put that here. Let's assume that we already covered this with the labor hours we entered on the previous sheet. And then we've got some space for sort of other agency costs that might accrue here, and that just don't fit into any other categories, but that you wanted to include. And some of these inputs you can see down here are grayed out because they only apply if you had chosen direct install up here. Okay, so scrolling down, we have some customer costs and this is for a replacement or an equivalent unit. And this is important because the device is going to have a lifetime, and maybe after 10 or 15 years it's going to wear out. And we're using the concept of equivalent replacement. So at the end of its life, we assume that the customer would replace it and install it with something that's equivalent. And so that affects how the costs accrue to the customer in this. So let's suppose that the efficient clothes washer retails for $800, whereas they could buy a standard sort of efficient model for $400. And maybe even the installation is a little bit more expensive for the efficient model for whatever reason. And annual maintenance, suppose this costs on average $70 per year to maintain, whereas the standard conventional model might be $50 a year to maintain. A couple of additional parameters. Percentage of the units that are actually installed. So this might be especially important with a giveaway program if you're giving away faucet aerators or hose nozzles, and not 100% of these end up getting installed. Maybe you know from polls or talking to people that only 80% of them actually end up getting installed and used. So we have a default of 100%, and but you can adjust this downward if you like. And then we also have this concept of free riders, which is not a parameter that you need to use, but some people like to use it to really be complete in their financial calculations. And this really represents people who are getting a rebate, but who would have done it anyway. They would have purchased this efficient model anyway, even without the rebate. So that's what economists would call a free rider. And we have this as a default of 0%, but you could enter a different percentage in here if you chose to. Okay, so that's it for the variable cost. Let's click Save, and you can see that we've got the check marks here indicating that we've already filled these out, so we're part of the way there. Now let's go to the benefits page and select customer class. So we see in here we've got a couple of different customer classes that we already entered as a default, and there's some other ones that you can custom enter. I'll show you that in a bit. So let's assume that a typical customer for this rebate is a single-family residential customer, and the lifetime of the device, let's say these last on average 16 years based on our information. And annual water savings, how much is this saving per year? So according to the cheat sheet that I'm working with here, these save on average 10,200 kilowatt hours, gallons per year. And then also, if it's an appliance that's using hot water, it's probably saving the customer energy as well, so they're getting some additional savings. Electrical savings, 774 kilowatt hours per year with this efficient model. And if that customer is on gas for hot water, would save them 37 therms of hot water per year. And there's also this checkbox at the bottom, saves outdoor water. So this is just a yes/no thing. And if it's something having to do with the landscape or pools or spas or things like that, you might put it under saves outdoor water. Now, that means you're not getting an equivalent reduction in wastewater flows. So since this is indoor water, we'll leave this unchecked. So they're saving 10,000 gallons indoors. That means they're also reducing their wastewater discharge by 10,000. So you get that benefit as well. Okay, so now we got all three of these checked. And there's a couple of more required inputs. And these are, first off, the customer rates. So how much is this particular customer paying for water, wastewater, and electricity and gas? So we've got some information sort of pre-entered here for single-family, residential, multifamily, commercial. You could enter a really particular customer class. For instance, if you've got a rebate that's directed to, I don't know, semiconductor manufacturers, you could enter that in here. Oops. All right. But we'll just leave it sort of like this right now. And another input is what percentage of the customers are heating their water with electricity versus gas. And I believe these numbers we have entered here are fairly typical of California and the West Coast, where most residential customers, majority at least, are using natural gas rather than electricity. But that may be changing over time. In the bottom here, for each one of these rates, we've got water, wastewater, electricity, and gas, is escalation rates. And this really represents, it's different from inflation, but what escalation is if you think that this service is going to get more expensive or less expensive over time for whatever reason, you could enter a percentage in here. So say we know our water rates are going to be going up over the next decade on average of about 5% per year. You could enter that in here. All right. Now, some folks have asked, well, our water rates are not quite that simple. It's not just a matter of a volumetric rate per 100 cubic feet or per kilogallon, but really we have a block rate, a tiered rate structure. So we do have a little worksheet where you could enter those in here. That's the tiered rate worksheet. So you can enter this size tier and the rate at each one of these tiers. But then you also have to enter what's the average consumption for a customer in this customer class, and then choose, am I going to give the average rate that's used by that consumer? So if I change this from 700 cubic feet per month to enter a user that's maybe in a higher block, so 22, now the average rate that this customer is paying, if you average out all the blocks, is 23 cents per 100 cubic feet, but the marginal rate is, so it's how much they're paying for that last unit of water they're consuming, or actually the first unit of water that they're going to be conserving is 41 cents. So am I going to use the average rate or the marginal rate? So I'll choose in here marginal rate, and now if I click save on this, now I've overwritten the information that was in there before and entered some new information. But let me go back and put the information that was already in there. Okay, one more input worksheet left, and that's this parameters worksheet. And these also turn out to be really important in the calculations. So first off, the planning horizon. How long of a planning period are we going to consider? So this is the number of years. And we chose 30 in particular. That might be long for a lot of your customers, which might be looking at, we want a payback of, in the next 5 years. But we found with a lot of agencies, utilities, this is the planning horizon that they might be using for any kind of capital expansion plan or, infrastructure planning. So fairly long term. And it's interesting to be able to put these conservation programs on an equal footing with some of these infrastructure projects. And then the annual discount rate. So this is the discount rate, or also the interest rate, also referred to as the cost of capital. I don't know anyone that's getting a 5% return on any kind of investment these days, although it was fairly standard a few years ago to be using 6-7% in a lot of these calculations. So we'll choose 5 here. You can always go back and change it and see how it affects your calculations later on. And then we have these avoided costs. So this is the reduced cost, and again, if you mouse over, you get a little bit of a description. The additional cost of building new facilities and other infrastructure to meet increased water demand. So the idea that if we're saving water, we're actually reducing these sort of capital expansion costs, also reducing our operation and maintenance costs, and there also may be an escalation rate associated with building some of this infrastructure, and that it's going to get more expensive over time. So you can optionally enter that in there as well. And we have those same sort of inputs for water, sewer and wastewater, natural gas, and electricity. And these are especially important if on that first sheet you clicked that, that your utility is providing these services. Now we also have these environmental benefits. And the idea is that water that's left in the environment is of some sort of a cash value, certainly of sort of an aesthetic and a recreational value in a lot of places, but it may also be able to put a dollar figure on that. And we don't try to do anything special to help you figure that out, but refer you to one source of being able to calculate that is the CUWCC, that's the California Urban Water Conservation Council, has an environmental benefits model that you can download for free on their website. So that done, click Save, and we've now got check marks on all these things, input complete 100%, and this Calculate button, which was sort of grayed out before, is now green, which means we can click it. And once we do that, it'll take us to the summary report. And so here we are looking at our sample run from the agency perspective. So we just entered one conservation measure, the high efficiency clothes washers, and we've got a bunch of different financial metrics. The net present value, which is sort of one of the most important ones, and that's taking this whole 30-year series of cash flows of costs and benefits, so these avoided costs, the costs to the agency, and putting them into one value. And so if we look at the annualized cost we're spending, if you put it into equivalent uniform annual values, $26,000 per year, but we're having an annualized benefit from all these savings of $42,000. So that gives us a benefit cost ratio of 1.63, so it's greater than 1, so that says to me, go ahead and invest. The payback time is 22 years, fairly long payback, but definitely cost effective. Internal rate of return, which you can use to compare to your prevailing interest rate that you might be able to get from another investment. So say I could sink my cash into a bond or a stock market or something like that. How much would I be returning? Would I get as a return? You can compare it to this number. Modified rate of return is just a slightly different version of the internal rate of return that's calculated with a different formula. I won't go into a lot of detail about that, but refer you to the manual for more information. And so aside from all the financial stuff, how much water are we saving? Annual water savings in terms of million gallons per day. And this is after these 5 years are up and we've given the maximum number of rebates. What's the maximum amount of water that we're saving? And then also this is the same in terms of wastewater savings. And then we have the levelized cost or benefit of conserved water. And so what is this? Let me scroll. This is maybe a little bit of a new concept for some folks, but this would be the equivalent annual expense for each million gallons of water saved. So how much money are we spending per million gallons of water saved? So a lot of folks would compare this to the cost of going out and drilling new well fields or seeking out some sort of alternative source of supply. How much would that cost per million gallons? You can compare it to this number here, how much it costs for this conservation program. So we've got actually 3 different output reports. This one is from the agency perspective, and we can also look at the customer perspective. And what this this is looking at it from the perspective of a single customer. And so how much does the incremental capital cost to them? So you remember this clothes washer for them was a little bit more expensive than the standard model, but they got this rebate. So it's still costing them $300 more, this incremental cost. How much more does it cost than the sort of standard model? And the net present value after they've owned this thing for a while and the planning horizon of 30 years, they've spent some money, but they've also saved some money. If you net that out to present day, they have a net present value of $3,000. They're saving $167 per year. So this looks really good from the customer's perspective, at least the way I entered it. Payback in a couple of years. Not always able to calculate an internal rate of return for sort of technical reasons if the cash flow swaps sign more than once. Modified internal rate of return. So you can see a bunch of different metrics here. How much water they're saving, wastewater. And you have to interpret these last two columns a little bit carefully because most customers aren't going to be saving both electricity and gas. This is kind of an either-or proposition. So if they're saving, if they're using electricity to heat water, they're probably saving electricity. And if they're heating with gas, then it's this column that you would pay attention to. So you can click down to the combined perspective. And so this is combining both all of the customers and the utility together into sort of a large sort of societal entity and doing all of these same calculations, which look familiar at this point. All right, so that's the summary report, and we've got some charts, and these look really boring because we've only got one measure. I only put these high efficiency clothes washers. This is going to look a lot more interesting once I enter different conservation programs and we can start comparing them. But we can also look at the cash flow. So here's the cash flow diagram from the agency perspective. So we ran this program for 5 years, and you can see negative cash flow. So we're spending money for these first 5 years, but we're also starting to get some return. And then for the 30 years after that, here are these returns. And this is from these reduced operation and maintenance costs and avoided capital costs. Click down to the customer's perspective. This looks a lot different. The customer in year 0, they're investing this $300 to buy the new clothes washer, and then they're getting this pretty steady, consistent returns. But then if you recall, we entered it has a 16-year life. In year 16, their washer dies and they have to go buy a new one. And this arrow is a little bit shorter than it is in year 0, and that's because of the time discounting. With interest rates applied, things are always worth less out in the future than they are at present day, and then out to 30 years, these series of cash flows. And if at the end of time there's some value left in sort of a recently purchased device or appliance, you might get some salvage value. So that's how we take into account at the end. So say we had entered a 20-year time horizon, you would have a larger salvage value, which kind of helps keep all the math done properly. And so that's that. I'm going to go back to the input and let me know if there are any questions. I don't see anyone with their hand up yet. Oh, but I do. There might be some questions in the questions pane. Let's see here. Okay, I do see one question here. Sorry, I missed these earlier. These might have been there for a while. And is that a combined rebate for energy and water efficiency? And so that, I think, is going to be back on this variable costs page where I entered the rebate. And so, yeah, that would be the total rebate that the customer is receiving. So that might be, we're giving them a rebate, but part of it is subsidized by the energy utility. So I hope that answers that question. And the next question is, I may have my colleague Heather answer this one. Is this tool related to the Alliance Water Conservation Tracking Tool? My initial answer to that is that no, it's not directly related to that. That's sort of a parallel but distinct effort from ours, and I think that's also a valuable resource for folks. And let's see, one more question here is, can the model take into account a manufacturing standard scheduled to become active in 2014? And my initial thought for that is probably not. This isn't really intended to sort of take into account this, what we call passive conservation, which would come about just from sort of net laws and plumbing standards and things like that. This is really meant if your agency is making an investment where you're pushing these devices out to your customers and you're spending a certain amount of money to do that. I think that sort of passive conservation stuff is really important, but it does not necessarily the goal of our model to capture that. Ours is really just intended to help you calculate some of these sort of financial metrics. So I hope that answers that question. And let's see, there's another question that popped up here. Can you address how the various tools, I think there are 3 now, are different and how they fill different needs? When do we use which? That's also a great question. And if you don't mind, I'm going to save that to the end and just show one more little feature here, and then we'll get to that question if that's all right. Which is, okay, and I see one gentleman has his hand raised. We'll answer your question in just a minute. I just want to show one last thing here, which was, we just showed one conservation measure. So I'm going to go back and open an existing file, which was a demo that I put together earlier. So this is kind of like on a cooking show, when you take the meatloaf out of the oven and everything's finished. So here I've got 3 different measures: the high efficiency clothes washer, toilet rebate program, and a pre-rinse spray valve purchase program. And so these are intended for, I think, different customer classes. Let's see, this pre-rinse spray valve is meant for restaurants and hotels. Oops. Let's see, that didn't work quite right. Let me cancel that. And so if we calculate here, this should show us the results. So here we've got a little bit more interesting because we've got different results for these different conservation measures. And all these columns are sortable. You can click on the little arrow icons here and sort. And so this is kind of a nice view here, or we can look at it in terms of a chart view. So here we've got, make sure to show that too. We're showing the net present value, but we can change the metric by clicking the scroll bar. So here's the annualized cost, annualized benefit, benefit to cost ratio. So you can kind of look at some of the different conservation measures. And the last feature I wanted to show is, so this is nice, it lives sort of in the spreadsheet. Everything's sort of protected from casual users, so you can't edit things on the fly very easily. We also put an export feature, which we think is pretty flexible and pretty powerful, where you can export as much or as little of this information as you want. So when you click that, you'll get this little dialog box pop up. So say I want to export everything: the reports, the charts, the cash flow diagrams, and where do I want to put them? A new Excel workbook, a Word document, PowerPoint, a web page. So let's say I want to put these into a new Excel workbook, and which perspective? Maybe I just want agency and customer, and I don't care so much about this combined society perspective. So where do I want to put it? I'll click Save here. Okay, this may take a few minutes. Please be patient. I've got a fairly powerful computer, so it's pretty fast. So here we go. All that information is now in a new spreadsheet. Widen that column so you can actually read it. And you can edit this to your heart's content, export it, change it, modify it, mash it up. We've got charts which are editable, so you can change the colors and all sorts, whatever you want. So that's that. That's more or less, I think, a complete demo. So let's see if now I can get to your questions. And the gentleman who had his hand up no longer has his hand up. So if you still have a question, put your hand up again and we'll unmute you. And let's see if there are any remaining questions here. Okay. I think I may turn it back to Heather, if that's all right, to answer this question here. Oh, okay. Oh, there is one question before I turn it over to Heather that I think I'm well poised to answer. So is there a sensitivity analysis to see which inputs most impact the outputs? That's a great question. We actually have a section on the website under FAQs about that exact topic because we thought that would be a really useful use of this model. The initial answer is no, we don't have it built in explicitly so that it's just a feature where you click sensitivity analysis, but it's fairly easy to, for instance, go, export my output, go in parameters and say, change the annual discount rate from 5 to 3. Save that, run it again, and then look at how this output is different compared to the outputs that I just exported. So it does require you to do a little bit of work on your own. Another way to do it would be if I just wanted to change a few elements of the program, I could enable a new program, and I could call this, instead of pre-rinse spray valve, I could call it, let's see, I don't know, spray valve number 2. And then when I get to the fixed costs here, I can import. And so I get this dialog box, and I can import all the parameters from the pre-rinse spray valve. So now everything's exactly the same. It's a clone. And I can do that for each one of these tabs. Import, save, and then benefits, import. And now, say, instead of the lifetime of the device being 5 years, what if it lasts for only 3 years instead? That's going to change the financial metrics quite a bit, I think. So we can save that, and then we can calculate. So now recall, everything about this measure, the third measure I entered and the fourth measure are identical except for the lifetime. Well, it turns out this didn't have a big impact from the agency perspective because remember, it's up to the customer to replace it once it's well, this didn't have a big impact at all. Okay, I guess I'd have to change something else on the input. For instance, the amount of the water savings. So maybe if I went to the benefits tab, and instead of saving $50,000 per year, maybe it saves only $25,000 per year. So I can save that and calculate again. Okay, so now you can see the net present value is pretty different because the savings are so different. The costs are the same. We're still spending the same amount for this device. And again, from the customer perspective, their value is not as high because they're not saving as much. So you can do that, and you can see how sensitive it is to these different inputs. So, I learned that it's the lifetime of the device. There's not a lot of sensitivity, at least the way that we set up the input parameters. But for the water savings, it's highly sensitive, and you can repeat that for any different number of parameters that you want. So now, in terms of comparing the different tools, I think Heather's more well posed to answer that question. So I'm going to turn it over to her. So thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you. So the question was, there are 3 models out there, and how are they similar and how are they different? So the 3 models I believe you're referring to, aside from this one, the other one would be the Alliance for Water Efficiency model, and then there's a new model from Madaus that does something similar, although the Madaus model is focused quite heavily on the California Urban Water Conservation Council and some of the BMP requirements and specifically the Memorandum of Understanding. And so that one is a bit more specific than ours. Ours is broader in that you can compare a lot of different water conservation and efficiency measures. Ours also, whereas the Madaus model tends to focus on net present value, ours includes net present value but also looks at a variety of other financial metrics. And so, there is no sort of best answer for which financial metric is most appropriate. Each has sort of advantages and disadvantages. And so, from our perspective, I think it's quite important to not only look at net present value, but to look at some of these other sort of metrics for evaluating whether it makes economic sense to pursue a measure. I am not as familiar with the Alliance for Water Efficiency measure tool. That one is only available to members, and so the one that we have here is available to everyone at no cost. And so those are sort of what I think are the primary differences. Let's see, are there any other questions? Is anybody, and you can go ahead and raise your hand, or you can type a question in, whenever you're most comfortable. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions, so let me just take this opportunity to thank you all for attending the webinar. And again, it has been recorded and will be posted on our website along with the model and the user's manual. Thank you.